Welcome to a two-part series over a Victorian ghost project. The video that you're watching now is part one, and it's going to cover the basic architecture of the project, and part two is going to cover the ghost, the accessories, and a little bit of the story. I've been working on this project in the background for quite a while. This is actually a project that I've been doing with my guild. We started this at the beginning of the year before all of the chaos, and we worked on it together as a group. Since that time, we have worked on it separately, but we were all working off the same basic frame. Everyone was given a box made of plywood, just like this one. We were given a staircase that started up at the top, came down and turned the corner, and we were given the railing for the staircase and a window. Everyone was given those items, and then from that you could really make whatever you wanted to make. So because of the fact that this originally started with a group and I was working on it with a group, I can't show you the first part of this project. I did quite a lot off camera, but I'm gonna walk you through it. And then the video you will see here is what I started working on my own. Here's the extent of what I got done before I turned on the camera. As you can see, I still have the turning staircase that goes from the top down to the corner. I have the floor. I wallpapered everything in like a dark, rich green. And then I also built out a wall area. There was a possibility that I could cover up this stair area and make it like a door underneath there, but I chose to leave it open. I decided to pop out this wall. I just made it, I think it's 3/4 inches thick, and I wanted to do this so that I could inset this creepy door. I wanted to look very large and ominous, and then I used mat board to carve the door and create all the pieces that are going diagonally across it. It was this initial staircase design that really made me want to have a ghost floating down. So she's going to be floating down these lower 4 stairs, and I'm going to have to find a way to suspend her in the air. I don't want you to be able to see her feet at all in this one. It also has this kind of awkward upper space where the stairs are disappearing into an invisible upper room, and so I'm going to do a few things to kind of hide that a little bit more as well. So that's the basic tour of the box, and so from here we can continue on. I knew right away that one of the first things I needed to complete was the floor before I could do anything else in the project. But I really think the way that I did this floor brought a lot of character to the room, and so I'm going to show you that now. And before I officially started the floor, I wanted to make sure that my ghost idea would work. Again, my ghost build is going to be in part 2 of my video, so you kind of got a preview there, but I did want to plan out how she was going to float in the air before I got too much done on the floor. So what I decided to do was to hook a wire to her back, and the wire would flow down the back of her dress so that it was hidden, and then it would go through the stair. And so I have one hole drilled through the stair, and I'm going to drill a second hole because I do want her to glow within the space. And so I need to have a second hole in order to thread the wire through. So I'm just using my Dremel going through the stairs, and this is where it's really helpful that it's open underneath the stairs. I won't be installing the ghost right now because she'd kind of be in the way while I was working on everything else, so I just wanted to make sure that I knew where she was going, there'd be enough room, and that I wouldn't regret drilling into something later. So as you can see, the wire's just going to hold her in like so, and she will float above the stairs. So now that that's all settled, I can dive into the floor. I made a pattern of the existing floor, and then I found this material that I had in my stash. I have looked at several dollhouse suppliers to find a link for this so that I could provide it for you, but I have yet to find one. So if you know where it could possibly be found, put it in the comments and I will make sure to pin your comment. This floor, it's kind of like a vinyl, well, it's not a vinyl, it's kind of it's a faux leathery texture, and then it has the tile shapes imprinted on it. It's very shiny and it's a little bit too shiny for my project. So the first thing I'm doing is laying down a coat of matte black acrylic paint because this is what color I want the grout lines in between the tile to be. I'm going to use a paper towel and some cream paint to go over the top. The first time I pushed onto the tile, it was just a little bit too much and it got into the cracks that I had just carefully painted. So if you do try this technique, just be very light-handed with the paper towel because you want all the paint to stay on the top of the tile and not get into the grout. I'm doing a layer of tan first because I think the majority of tiles are going to be tan. I did quite a bit of research looking into Victorian floors, and they're just elaborate patterns, a lot of very bold borders that go around the room, and so I wanted to duplicate that with my floor here. I'm starting with a light green acrylic that's going to go all the way around the border of the floor, but I end up turning to a darker green. I think it worked a little bit more with the wallpaper, but later on I do go back and add some more light green as well. So here you can see the darker green kind of took over, and so I have my first border piece. With the lighter green, I'm going to go in between the two dark green lines, and every other square is going to be a light green. This did take a very long time as I'm having to paint each individual square, and even though they're tiny, it does take a little bit of time to make sure I get each square painted so that it looks correct. I decided to add a dark brown in between the light green squares because I feel like this is going to tie in the dark brown of the stairs and the eventual dark brown of the architecture. So the floor is really working as a piece that's tying everything together. I also make the decision to add one more layer of border, which is really kind of amping up the amount of brown that's in the floor, but I really do think it adds to the design. So now I'm going to be working on the interior patches, and I don't want to create anything that's too disturbing or well, I don't mean to say disturbing, not like scary, but that takes away from the scene, but I do want it to look a little bit more intricate. So I'm using a darker tan on top of the lighter tan, and I'm working in 4 square groups, and I'm skipping a square of 4 and making a pattern. I feel like doing it this way will give some of that extra over-the-top decoration that the Victorians like to use, but it won't take away or distract. Distract is the word I was looking for, not disturb. Distract from the scene and take your eyes too much away from what is going on. Once I do that all over, I am ready to seal the floor with some gloss Mod Podge. I'm using gloss Mod Podge because I want this to be a tile floor, and even though it's an old tile floor, it will still have some shine. But of course, once the Mod Podge has dried, I do go back and age it. This is supposed to be a haunted or abandoned Victorian home, which is obviously taken over by some ghosts, and so I want to make sure that it matches the story. I'm using watered down acrylic paint for this process, and I'm just doing one thin layer at a time, and as soon as I'm happy with the amount of dirt and grime that has built up, then I will stop. I'm making sure to add a little bit extra near the area where the door will be and the edges of the room. I also made this small piece that will go onto the landing. I didn't have anything really to go up there, so I thought it would be nice to have a piece that matched the basement floor. I'm guessing it'll be a basement. Yeah, I think it's a basement. To install this, I'm using some tacky glue, and I'm just spreading that all over wherever I can. It does get a little bit difficult to get into this spot, so I am trying to work in a certain order that makes sense for accessibility to the rest of the project. Once I have the glue in, I'm just going to lay my pieces down and make sure they are as flat as possible. For the larger tile piece, it's just a little bit easier to just start dumping some glue, and I'm using Mod Podge as glue for this. It is essentially a glue, and I'm just dumping bits and then spreading it around. The reason I'm doing it this way is because glue does start to dry pretty quickly, and I want to make sure that I have enough time as possible to move it around if I need to. I'm working carefully and quickly to get the floor into place. I did dry fit it, so make sure you do dry fit your floors before you spread glue everywhere. I have done it before where I have not dry fit the floor and caused myself some problems. But as you can see, I'm working on this floor by pulling it into place. The glue takes hold pretty quickly, but because I use the method of dumping it and spreading it, it's still fairly thick, which means I have a little bit of time to move it around. So here you can see the floor in place. I won't show it in this video because I don't think I recorded it, but I do end up putting baseboards to cover up all those areas you can still see on the sides. I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to put stair runners on these stairs. So I cut a bit of fabric and I folded over one end for the very top of the stairs, and then I added glue and slowly worked down the stairs, pressing with my fingers so that the glue touched the stair. I want the entire thing to be as close, or let's see, as glued to the shape of the stairs as possible. I don't want any bits of it sticking up or looking loose, as these pieces were heavily nailed down so that no one would trip. And I do go back and age it a little bit later so that it looks like it's been there for years and years. Oh, and I also do this to the upper stairs as well. When it came to the architecture of the room, I went ahead and pulled out one of my Victorian architecture books. These are so helpful if you're interested in a certain part of architecture or a certain time or era of architecture. I highly suggest looking into some books or going to your library and checking out some books on architectural details. They're basically drawings of different items that you would find in the architecture of that time. To find what I wanted, I just kind of flipped through the book, looked through all the examples, and I came to this piece right here. I don't know if you can see that on camera. And so I took this idea and I started designing it in a program that creates SVGs, because this is so detailed and this pattern had to be repeated so many times that I decided to put it into my laser cutter. Based off of this one design here, I created the architecture pieces that go around the top, the ceiling, a door frame, and a window frame. I did end up simplifying the patterns just a bit for my own purposes, and so a little bit of artistic liberty taken there. And then once I had cut them, they had to be assembled. So this does look like a mess, but in the end, it does come together. I made everything in layers, so I'm just going to use some glue and start layering on the different levels of detail. I do hope to someday add these to my store because I think it's so fun to create architectural details. They add so much to a project, but I have a super long backlist of things I need to add to my store, so I'm not quite sure when that's actually going to happen. I need to maybe take off like a month or something and just get the things in my store that I've been mentioning I want to put in my store. But I do think architectural details are just something so fun, and yeah, it is hard to do without a laser cutter because it's such a precise cut. So I think having it in my store would be a benefit for anyone who thinks that they could use these. I'm going to be using acrylic paint over the entire thing. I do want these pieces to look like carved wood, which would be a typical detail in a Victorian home. I don't think I end up showing it here on the video, but I do use a lighter color brown to go back and just give a little bit of variation to this paint job. And by the way, it just started storming here, so if you hear some background storm noises, that's what's going on. So it's giving us some atmosphere. Here's the final piece I'm just kind of dry fitting it, seeing how it's going to look. It is going to heighten the ceiling height in the center area, which is great because I want to put a chandelier in there and I want to have enough room so that my ghost doesn't look like she's kind of squashed in that area. I'm gluing these on, making sure that everything is straight and level, and then I will continue the crown molding around on top once everything is in place. Here's all 3 sides installed with the crown molding, and this storm is just getting louder and louder, so maybe we'll have some lightning and thunder by the time I'm done recording. To create the ceiling, I used some of the exact same shapes, but I just reworked them into a grid pattern, and again worked in layers to make multiple layers of detail. And I'm just going to glue everything together. And I really do like how this turned out, although I do realize at the end there's a little bit of a problem with my grid, but I think if you're not like looking super close, you wouldn't notice it. But in the end, it works. It matches with my cornice pieces, and I'm pretty happy with the turnout. I also used those same exact shapes to make a door frame and a window frame, and some more detail pieces to go with that. I didn't originally have these door frames and window frames in mind when I first put the door and window spacing in, so I might have done that a little bit differently, but it works out in the end. I'm using the same exact steps of adding some brown acrylic paint and then some lighter brown just to brush over the entire thing, just to give it a little bit of a highlight. And here are the finished results. I want everything to look as though it has the same exact wood finish, and I will age them a little bit, but I don't want to do that until it's actually on the wall. At this point, I am dry fitting the window piece, which I made specifically to fit in this rectangular hole. And as you can see, there are still a couple little gaps at the top, but thankfully I still had some of the green wallpaper. I cut a very small piece and patched it so that hopefully no one who wouldn't know it was there would notice. And then this piece fit really well around the door, so I was happy with that as well, and I was able to glue these in. Here's how they all look once they're glued in. I have the cornice pieces around the top, I have the door frame and the window frame in, and from here you can also see the stair runner on the top flight of stairs, which have not been aged yet. And here is the ceiling. As you can see, I'm using some other scrap mat board pieces that I had tested something else out on. But here's a little sneak peek at the ceiling on top of the cornices, and there is literally a tornado siren going off right now, so I guess I'll be right back. I will be the first to admit that I do not know very much about electricity, so I was very thankful that my husband was able to help me on this one. Instead of using battery lights like I used in the Addams Family house, I decided I wanted to use wired lights, and so I got online, found the lights that I wanted, and asked him if he would be able to help me install them. Because of that, I can't be super helpful when it comes to how the wiring goes together for them to work, but I can show you how I physically installed the lights. I first drilled a hole through the ceiling that was just behind where I wanted the base. Is it called the base or the top? I guess when it comes to a ceiling, it's the top part of the light is going to be glued. I added some tacky glue to the ceiling and some super glue to I'm just going to call it the base, the light base itself. Then I pulled the wire through and made sure that I glued the light piece, the base, down flat so that it was flush against the ceiling. Then I made sure it could rest where there was nothing pulling on the base and it could dry completely. I also wanted to add some little lanterns on either side of the ominous door. For this, I had to cut a hole in the top of my jut out wall, which actually ended up being perfect that there was space behind there because I could hide the wiring behind the wall. You may have also noticed from this perspective, my hand is hiding it right now, but there is a tiny little battery pack. The ghost is going to be on a battery while everything else is wired, and that's just the easiest way I could figure out how to do it, so that's the way we went with it. The lanterns came with their own sticky back, which would be fine once I pulled the wires through to stick it to the wall, but because I want to make sure that it never comes off of the wall, I added just a drop of super glue so that that would dry and hold itself. And here's how the lanterns are looking next to the door. I decided instead of using the original window that I received when I got the box, I was going to make my own window, which you saw. And I wanted to go with a very similar process that I did with Cousin It's room, which was making the glass incredibly foggy. So when you're looking into the scene, you can't see the outside world. I think it just gives you a much more cohesive look. You get a little bit more lost in the diorama that way. In case you didn't see how I did Cousin It's windows, I'm just gonna walk it through real quick here. I'm using a piece of acetate, or this is just like projector film that you would write on in a classroom, and I cut it out to the correct size for the window. I am sanding it on both sides, kind of in a circular fashion, but I'm also doing up and down. I want to get a really good sand on both sides. Now I'm adding some grates that I also cut out with my laser cutter. I'm adding a thin layer of Mod Podge in order to get a good coverage of glue so that the grates will stick down and I won't have any little bits that start sticking up once I add the UV resin. I'm adding grates on both sides of the acetate so that it's sandwiched in between. I'm saying grates, but I guess what I actually mean is leading, because I want these windows to look as though they're leaded. The black parts are leading and it's holding individual pieces of glass in place. So that's why I'm doing it this way. And once the resin is added on top, it will look like individual pieces of glass. I'm using UV resin here and I'm slowly adding a little bit at a time and then working it around with a toothpick, making sure that I completely fill in every single square. Once I have the entire thing covered, I can use my UV light, which is the flashlights that's off to the right there. And I'm gonna start way far away, holding it up, and then slowly get closer and closer as it cures. Once it cures, you can see that it does look a little bit more like individual panes of glass. I'm going to do that on both sides, and I will end up having a pretty sturdy window. Once I insert the window pane into the window frame, I'm using my gallery glass leading and putting it all around the edge. This kind of seals the window in. It covers any imperfections, and since it's made to look like leading, it just kind of blends in. And here's how the blurriness looks. And finally, I wanted to create one little detail to maybe draw some interest, maybe hold you here until next week where I can share part 2. I am adding some locks and chains to the large door that's in the bottom of this project. This is going to come into play when I tell you the story. The easiest way I could think to do this was to get some hook eye screws and then create a pattern of the door itself on a piece of paper. This way I could work on my desk instead of trying to get the chains to behave inside the project. I laid out the hook eye screws where I thought they would go inside. I wanted the chains to look kind of haphazard, and to create the chains I'm using some necklace chains that I got at the craft store, and I'm going to cut these apart and use these. They're different sizes and different shapes because I want them to look like maybe the chains have been added over the years. I'm using pliers and some jewelry connectors to connect the chains to the screws on either end, and I am not making them too tight. I want them to droop just a little bit, but I'm trying to just kind of change up the pattern, make it look a little bit interesting, and this is what I came up with. I'm marking out where the screws are so I can transfer where I need to drill into the wall so I can add the screws into the wall. I'm going to be using my Dremel to drill into the side, and then once those are in place, I can just transfer the screws and glue them into the wall, leaving my chains in place. I used the same pliers and jewelry connectors to connect some locks to the chain to make them a little bit more convincing and maybe a little bit more ominous. And it makes it really fun because the one that ends up having the keys is the ghost. I hope you'll stay tuned to next week, and I will share more about this project, the accessories, how I made the ghost, and I will share a short story that gives you a little bit more information on what's going on here. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!